I watch a lot of movies.
Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome was co-directed by George Miller and George Ogilvy and stars Mel Gibson for his third and final time as Max. The film once again follows Max after he is exiled from the most advanced town in post-apocalyptic Australia. He then travels with a group of abandoned children to rebel against the town's queen. After the massive success of The Road Warrior in 1981, this film would get a majorly increased budget of an estimated $10 million. The film would then release in 1985, and it would gross $36 million at the worldwide box office. At the film's inception, it actually was not going to be a Mad Max film at all. It was going to be a Lord of the Flies type story where a wanderer helps out a group of children, and George Miller looked at that concept and was like, hey, let's make this a Mad Max movie. So now after the first two rated R, hard-edged, and grittier Mad Max films, we now have a lighter, softer, more kid-friendly version of Mad Max here in Beyond Thunderdome. And with Tina Turner stepping in to play the villain, Auntie Entity, and providing a couple songs for the soundtrack, we now have our third Mad Max film. But does this film close out Mel Gibson's classic Mad Max trilogy in a satisfying way? Well, let's jump into my review for Mad Max 3 Beyond Thunderdome. Now, to start this off, I think the best thing about this film is what George Miller continues to expand on with every entry in this series, and that's the world building and the way he executes it. Where they choose to open this film and where they choose to put Max, I think is really interesting in the opening of this. Rather than retreading Road Warrior, they do something a little bit different here. And through Max in the opening minutes of this film, we're introduced to this new city, this new society of people in this place called Bartertown, and it's essentially a trade city. It's all pretty interesting. And it's here that we're introduced to some of our new side characters, such as Angelo Rosito playing the Master, and Paul Larson as the Blaster, making Master Blaster, and Auntie Entity played by Tina Turner. And it's here in this town that Max finds himself when he's searching for his car. And in order to get it back, he makes a deal with Tina Turner to fight for his life in the Thunderdome. Now, I think what George Miller does here with furthering the world building of his universe is really cool. This section of the film is interesting, and seeing this hierarchy of people in this city and kind of the way everything runs, it's all really fascinating. And I guess it's just really cool that George Miller was able to take a concept for a film that wasn't even supposed to be Mad Max and turn it into a Mad Max film and actually kind of make it interesting and you know, at least the first third of this sort of fit in his universe. And I suppose this section of the film wasn't really supposed to be that Lord of the Flies type film anyways. I think this was probably added later to make it more of a Mad Max movie, which I guess would explain why this is probably the best stuff in the movie. And I suppose that would also explain why this section of the film feels the most like Mad Max out of the whole thing. And I also really like how the first third of this or so sort of builds up to this big fight in the Thunderdome. And the Thunderdome fight I actually think is pretty cool. I like the concept of it with having all the weapons hanging from different parts of it, and them hanging on these kind of bungee cords so they can jump around. It's pretty neat to watch. But all of that stuff that I assume was added to make this more of a Mad Max film that you might come to expect, once you get out of that section of the film, about the first third, is where this movie kind of starts to fall apart, unfortunately. So as I stated in the synopsis, he ends up teaming up with this group of kids, and this is where the film really starts to fall apart, as I said, and it really starts to feel less like a Mad Max movie and more like a, well, Lord of the Flies kind of thing. And that's all, unfortunately, where pretty much all of my positives stop and my negatives kind of take over. Now, I understand The Road Warrior came out in 1981, but if there was ever an 80s Mad Max movie, it's this one. And that does provide some of the, more entertaining aspects of the film, but that definitely provides some of the negatives of the film as well. From Tina Turner and, the soundtrack that she provides, and then kind of the feel and tone of the movie feels like what Hollywood would have been putting out at that time for a movie of this type. And what I mean by that is they decided to take an established property that was known for one thing and then kind of changing it for this film and watering it down to a PG-13 rating. And that PG-13 rating does kind of hurt the tone of the film throughout it, especially with the storyline with the kids and everything, but it really hurts the action sequences, or lack thereof. After that Thunderdome sequence, the movie kind of just grinds to a halt, really, until you get to that last, typical for these movies, final chase sequence that here I think just feels a bit tacked on, like they had to do it because it was a Mad Max movie, and it's just a bit more watered down. While the stunts are really good still, the music and the tone and the 45 minutes that it had just come before it, I think really just kind of make it feel a lot more watered down and just not gritty like the last couple of films. But I truly think that PG-13 rating is this film's biggest detriment. And I think having the sort of Lord of the Flies starting concept here, you can kind of feel that once you get to that whole section of the film, and it really makes Max feel completely out of place in like 2/3 of this movie. And I've heard a lot of comparisons to Peter Pan with him and these children, and honestly, I cannot think of a better way to sum it up. It absolutely does feel like that. And when I think of Mad Max, I certainly don't think of Peter Pan. Now, all of those things were definitely deliberate choices made by the filmmaker and definitely makes sense for the era that this film came out in, especially in that kind of mid-'80s era. And then, the choice to add Tina Turner into this, I understand wanting to go bigger and better. And I do kind of enjoy her character in the movie, but it does kind of date this film overall. Now, with all of that said, I do think that taking a concept for a film that's not supposed to be a Mad Max movie and making it one, I think this movie could have been a lot worse. And I do think a lot of people kind of overhate this film because I don't think it's a bad film. I think it's just okay, unfortunately. I completely understand the want to just go bigger with this thing, and I understand the want to sort of appeal to a wider audiences and make a maybe more kid-friendly Mad Max film with that PG-13 rating. I just think it ultimately hurts this film quite a bit overall and makes this kind of feel like a watered-down slog to get through, and it really, unfortunately, ages the film and kind of cheapens it. But the opening act of this film, the first third or so of it, I think is definitely enough to give it at least somewhat of a recommendation, and it's definitely what makes this movie at least okay. Now, overall, it's not as good as Mad Max, and it's definitely not as good as The Road Warrior, but I do still think it's okay, and it's definitely not as bad as everyone else makes it out to be. Now, I would have been a bit disappointed if this was the last film that we got from the Mad Max franchise, but thank you, George Miller, for coming back and redeeming yourself with Mad Max Fury Road. You didn't have to do it because you gave us Road Warrior, but you gave us a possibly better Road Warrior. But more on that in another video. I really hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, hit that like button and please consider subscribing and hitting that bell icon so you don't miss a thing from me. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again soon. Cheers.
Yeah, I watch a lot of movies.